Hello, I'm Carter Threlkeld, and welcome to Introduction to Worship. Let's begin today's lesson. In the years following the American Revolution, the United States experienced a long period of spiritual decline. During the Revolutionary War, churches had been burned, the economy had fallen into decline, many pastors had lost their lives in the war, and there was a lack of spiritual leadership. Alcoholism, lawlessness were out of control. And out of this darkness emerged a single cure through something called a concert of prayer. In 1794, a Baptist pastor named Isaac Backus called for clergy in every American Christian denomination to come together in prayer for revival. A time was set for every Monday at noon. Presbyterian, Methodist, Congregational, Reformed, Moravian, and Baptist groups through New England all began to pray. Within a few years, this spiritual momentum triggered widespread religious revivals that moved from New England to the western frontier, drastically increasing church membership across every evangelical denomination and reshaping the religious landscape of the young United States. Beyond local church growth, the movement's impact extended into higher education and global outreach. At Yale College, the revival led to the conversion of over half the student body in a single year, while similar awakenings transformed other major campuses. This renewed spiritual fervor also laid the foundation for the modern missionary movement, fueling the creation of organizations like the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. Ultimately, the values championed during this period influenced significant 19th century social reforms, including abolitionism, temperance, and prison reform. In 1801, the Cane Ridge Revival began in Cane Ridge, Kentucky, and served as a cornerstone of the Second Great Awakening, fundamentally reshaping America's religious and social life. By drawing thousands to the Kentucky frontier for an intense, multi-day experience, it popularized the camp meeting format and emphasized a personal, emotional connection to God, as opposed to traditional church hierarchies. This democratization of faith empowered ordinary citizens, including women and the enslaved, to participate and even testify in public, fostering a new American identity built on spiritual equality. These shifts eventually led to the birth of influential American denominations such as the Disciples of Christ and the Church of Christ, which prioritized biblical simplicity over rigid creeds. Beyond its religious impact, the revival provided a critical moral foundation for the abolitionist movement in the United States. Revivalist theology framed slavery not just as a political issue, but as a profound moral sin that hindered personal salvation and corrupted the soul of the nation. This shift in perspective galvanized believers to take direct action, turning the spiritual fire of the frontier into a persistent demand for social justice. The inclusive interracial worship scene at Cane Ridge briefly modeled a society where racial barriers could be transcended, providing an early vision of a multiracial democracy that would eventually fuel radical anti-slavery efforts. Specific examples of this anti-slavery influence can be found in the lives of the revival's participants and leaders. Host minister Barton W. Stone was so transformed by the movement's message of equality that he became a committed abolitionist, eventually moving to Illinois to free the enslaved people of his family that his family had inherited. Similarly, the Methodist and Baptist denominations saw a surge in growth that empowered many congregants to challenge the institution of slavery as a condition of their new faith. This religious fervor also laid the groundwork for future leaders like Charles Finney, whose later revivals used moral suasion to convince thousands that the immediate end of slavery was a Christian duty. Ultimately, the Cane Ridge Revival helped establish the independent black church as a vital center for community and resistance. By allowing African Americans to preach and lead in a shared spiritual space, the revival encouraged the development of autonomous religious institutions like the AME Church, which became the backbone of the abolitionist organizing network. These institutional and ideological shifts ensured that the fight against slavery was no longer a fringe movement, but a central component of American evangelical identity. This transformation of the national conscience played a significant role in escalating the moral tensions that would eventually lead to the Civil War and the constitutional abolition of slavery. During these multicultural meetings, both folk music and spirituals were used as a source for material for worship. Here are two examples of some camp meeting songs. The next great revival also began with prayer. The Layman's Prayer Revival of 1857 began with a simple weekly noon prayer meeting started by Jeremiah Lanphier, a lay missionary for the North Dutch Reformed Church in New York City. On September 23, 1857, Lanphier opened the doors to a meeting room for the first time, inviting businessmen, clerks, and mechanics in the area to join him for an hour of prayer during their lunch break. He waited and waited for an hour and a half, all alone, before the first person arrived. Finally, 6 people attended that first meeting. The attendance grew over the next 2 weeks to 20 and then 40. But at this time, a severe financial panic hit the United States, causing banks to fail, businesses to go bankrupt, and widespread job losses. This crisis is widely considered the primary catalyst for the explosion of attendance, as people, feeling a profound sense of uncertainty and their need for God, began flocking to the prayer meetings in droves. The meetings became daily, and within 6 months, an estimated 10,000 people were gathering for daily prayers across various locations in New York City alone. The movement quickly spread across the nation, becoming known as the Layman's Prayer Revival because it was led primarily by ordinary people rather than famous preachers. The music associated with these meetings was primarily in the form of hymn singing. Well-known tunes were used by congregations such as Rock of Ages or What a Friend We Have in Jesus. The revival was focused on heartfelt participation rather than complex musical arrangements. Noted composers of this period were Philip Bliss, Howard Doane, and Francis Havergal. But the greatest and most prolific by far of these composers was Fanny Crosby. Fanny Crosby lived from 1820 to 1915. She was a blind American poet and missions worker who became the most prolific 19th century hymnist ever, writing from 5,000 to 9,000 sacred songs. She wrote so many songs she used several pseudonyms to write under because publishers told her they couldn't publish an entire book of just her songs. So they had to come up with other authors for these songs, which were her pseudonyms. Despite losing her sight at at 6 weeks old, she transformed American church music with enduring classics like Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine, To God Be the Glory, and Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior. Her simple, emotionally resonant lyrics, often composed quickly and dictated to a secretary, centered on themes of salvation, personal faith, and comfort. A devout Methodist, she also dedicated her life to service, working in rescue missions in New York City, making her a queen of gospel songwriters, whose work still defines modern congregational singing. The 1800s also saw a transition from the classical music period to the Romantic period. This transition marked a shift from balanced, structured forms like the sonata and the symphony to emotional, expressive individualism. While classical music prioritized clarity, symmetry, and logic, Romantic composers broke those boundaries, using larger orchestras, richer harmonies, chromaticism, and expanded musical forms to evoke intense personal feelings, to describe nature, and promote nationalism. Here's a brief video with examples of how differently Romantic music was composed than the music of the classical era. The most influential composers of the Romantic era are going to be Ludwig van Beethoven, Richard Wagner, Franz Liszt, Frédéric Chopin, Peter Tchaikovsky, and Hector Berlioz. Now, there are many, many other major composers of this era that we just don't have time to discuss. We've already talked about Beethoven, so let's talk about Richard Wagner. Wagner transformed opera into music drama, utilizing leitmotifs, advanced harmony, and continuous musical narratives, profoundly influencing musical structure. Please listen to this famous excerpt from one of his operas. Franz Liszt was an incredible showman, considered the first true superstar of classical music. He was known for his dazzling piano technique, flamboyant personality, and theatrical stage presence, which created a phenomenon called Listomania. I'm not kidding. He was also a pioneer who invented the solo recital and established many modern conventions of the classical concert experience. His counterpart, Frédéric Chopin, transformed piano music into a vehicle for intense poetic and emotional expression, redefining piano technique. Please listen to these excerpts of Liszt and Chopin. Next, the famous Russian composer Peter Tchaikovsky was the master of melody and emotion. His ballets and symphonies defined Russian Romanticism. They were based on mainly Russian folk melodies. Here is Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, followed by the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies from his Nutcracker Ballet. The instrument in the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies is called a celesta, which was invented in 1886. and was kept a secret until Tchaikovsky used it in this ballet. Hector Berlioz was a pioneer of orchestral color and programmatic music, expanding the scope of the symphony. Here's his famous Bolero. In the 1800s, the American musical experience was very distinct from Europe's, in that it was defined by a rapid blending of diverse cultural traditions, instead of a reliance on a long-standing homogeneous classical tradition. While European music was often characterized by rigid formality and high culture classical forms, American music was more community-focused and utilitarian, heavily featuring parlor songs and hymns. While American cities did not adopt European concert styles while American cities did adopt European concert styles in the last decade of the century, the broader American experience was marked by a rough, less academic approach, driven by a spirit of independence and the necessity of creating a new cultural identity. Ultimately, where Europe nurtured established art music, the United States was busy merging European melodic traditions with multicultural influences and rhythms from all around the world, laying the foundation for distinctly American genres like blues, jazz, and moving towards more democratic, commercially driven entertainment that would emerge in the 20th century. Well, that's the end of our lesson today. I hope it was a blessing to you.